Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a special live edition of the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. I decided to go live last minute on the subject of dispensationalism and should I go to a church that teaches dispensationalism. So, if you have any questions about this, any specifics, I know this was last minute, but make sure you leave a comment in the live chat. I'm also live streaming on Facebook, but I'm not watching comments. So if you comment on Facebook, I'm not going to see those until later. So I would recommend going on YouTube and watching live there if you would like to ask any specific questions, and I will try the best I can to interact with the live chat without getting sidetracked. So if there's any audio issues or anything like that too, let me know in there and I'll try to get that fixed. But this subject is one I've been getting asked a lot about this lately. People that are looking for churches and they're very nervous about going to a church that is dispensational. And the truth is, if you are looking for an independent fundamental Baptist church, there is a very good chance that they are going to be dispensational. But I'm here today to tell you that I don't want that to freak you out. I do not want you to just automatically cancel a church because they claim dispensations or it's on their website or something like that. And I'm going to explain why that is. And for those of you who watch this program a lot, you know I shoot at dispensationalism and dispensationalists all the time. And I do have major problems with that doctrine. And I do think there's a lot of dangerous heresies that are associated with it. But at the same time, I do not believe that everyone that is a dispensationalist is just some damnable heretic or that their church is no good. In fact, I would go as far as saying that probably some of the best churches that you will ever find, in fact, some of the best churches you will ever find, some of the best churches I have ever found just happen to be dispensational. Now, I do not believe those churches are great because of their dispensationalism. I believe they are great in spite of their dispensationalism. I think they would be better if they were not dispensational at all. But at the same time, I cannot deny the reality of all the good that is in these churches and the great things they are accomplishing and the great benefit that they can be to you. And I would hate to see anyone leave a good church just because of dispensationalism. I would hate that. I would hate for somebody not to go to one because they saw it on their website or their doctrinal statement. And I want to explain why that is in this live stream. And again, if you have any specific questions, please leave them in the chat. And it always helps me in case the live chat gets busy and going crazy. Just start out with question, and then that'll help me spot it faster. Let that be the first word, and that will help a lot. But let me just give you a little bit of testimony about myself, because I used to consider myself a dispensationalist. Okay, now the church that I am from would have considered themselves dispensational. But did you know that I never even learned that word until I was 18 years old? I was in a church, it was pre-trib, we were pro-Israel. I did not know the term dispensationalism until I was 18. It was when, after I graduated high school, there was a group of about 12 of us that led by my dad, where we did like a correspondence program of a college curriculum through Carolina Bible College. And we had these different classes we would do each semester. And in our first semester that we did, our four main classes that we had, were on the King James Bible, and we all had to read Bill Grady's Final Authority. That was where I was introduced to Bill Grady. Did not know he was a Ruckmanite. Didn't know what a Ruckmanite was. All I knew is I was 18 and I was King James only, and this book was defending the King James. Therefore, I'm going to eat up everything it says. I've not read that book since I was 18, so I don't really have much I could say about it, except I remember it was, all I knew is it was defending King James, so I was ready to just take in whatever it said. The other class we did was on 1 John. We read Warren Wiersbe's book on 1 John. It was B something. All his books were B something that he did on the books of the Bible. We had Advanced Principles of Biblical Hermeneutics, and that was the book title of the book, and hermeneutics was the class. And there's a lot of dispensationalism in that book. And then the fourth one we did was on dispensationalism, and we got Clarence Larkin's book, Dispensational Truth. And I knew that one was related to end times, and it was the one I was most excited about. And I read through that entire book. But I remember when I saw that on the list, I had to ask my dad. I said, "What is dispensationalism?" And and he kind of explained what it was. And I remember as we went through the class, we had these notes and things that were from Carolina Bible College we would go through. And one of the things I remember about it is that my dad was constantly correcting things in it. He was like, "Now, this is what this book teaches, but we don't actually agree with this." And so I remember just being kind of confused as a young man, because I'm thinking, man, this book, it's from like the early 1900s. This guy seems really smart. We're dispensationalists. Shouldn't we be following what this book says? But yet at the same time, I was constantly being shown where the book was unbiblical. And so I was confused. Thankfully, I knew, don't just take everything that it says super literal, because it did have a lot of problems in it. But ultimately, the reason I was told that we use it, it helps us explain why we are pre-trib, and also why we believe God is not done with Israel. Also, it's how we explain the differences between the Old and the New Testament. And so, I kind of took it with a grain of salt, but ultimately, if you would have asked me if I was dispensational, I would have said yes, even though I didn't agree with everything in the book. And it was mainly because of the pre-trib and some of the stuff with Israel. And those are not damnable heresies. And that is why most people, so I was told I was supposed to be dispensational. Therefore, I was dispensational. That is many of your Baptist churches. That is many of your Baptist preachers out there today. They are more dispensational politically. They have been told, this is what you are as an independent fundamental Baptist. Clarence Larkin was a Baptist, wrote a book about being Baptist, and we as Baptists were dispensational. Okay, count me in. But they've never actually studied it out. They've not looked deeply into it. They don't know the history of Larkin and Schofield and Darby. They don't know that stuff. All they know is there's a difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. All they know, we're pre-trib. All we know, God's not done with Israel. And so when you hear anybody defending those, those doctrines, you're just you naturally kind of gravitate towards them. And so most people, they're very ignorant about much of what's in Larkin's book. A lot of people too are very ignorant about Ruckmanites and what they teach. Often people on our side, we hear dispensational and we think of guys like Bill Grady and Sam Gipp. A lot of people aren't familiar with the heresies those guys teach. Okay, if you would have talked to me, in fact, if you'd have talked to me at the beginning of 2017, and if you would have asked me what I thought about men like Bill Grady and Sam Gipp, I would have had nothing but good things to say. All I knew about those guys, I had never heard Bill Grady preach before 2017, but I knew he was a defender of the King James. That's just going to put you on my side. I knew Sam Gipp was a defender of the King James. Most of the messages I had heard Sam Gipp preach were just kind of, uplifting, fiery up, preacher's conference type sermons. I'd never heard a lot of his crazy teaching. I had never heard him say that he never calls Jesus the Messiah and he's not your Messiah. I hadn't heard those things from him. I had heard of Ruckmanites at that point in my life, but I didn't really know much about what they were, except they were very zealous about the King James. Just maybe they got kind of weird about it. So, what I say all that to say that just because a preacher claims dispensations, it's on their statement of faith, he uses the word every once in a while, and maybe even just because they have Sam Gipp come preach, does not mean they are heretics. Many people are not aware of the foolishness of these guys. And guys like Sam Gipp, he knows where he can preach his dispensational nonsense and where he can't. And most churches he's going to go, and he's going to probably defend it. He's probably going to, do stuff promoting the King James Bible, do some of his uplifting, more encouraging messages. He's not going to get into the nonsense. So don't be quick to just write preachers off when it comes to these things. And so I was there at one time. And here's the thing. I literally was never challenged by anyone on my dispensationalism. I never got challenged. All those years I was an assistant pastor, even starting out becoming a pastor, I never was challenged by anyone about being dispensational. In fact, it was when I started doing my own study of eschatology and things that all of a sudden I started realizing, wait a minute, I think my view about Israel is one of the things that's kind of messing up why I can't reconcile some of these passages. And I remember, as I am trying to sort everything out, as I am trying to figure out how I came to the belief system that I had. And that's one thing I'm pretty good at doing at this point in my life, is determining what is scripturally based versus what is politically based. I've gotten pretty good at understanding how people are building their doctrine and what is built on clear scripture and what is built on speculation. That's something I've learned to do over the years. And so as I started kind of going and taking another look at how I had come to my position, I then came to realize that, well, a lot of this is built on the idea of certain principles taught in dispensationalism being correct. So it got me exploring those things. And so reality, I challenged myself on that. I challenged dispensationalism. And I remember somebody had given me a book on dispensationalism before any of this. And then when I was talking with somebody about all these things I was trying to understand, I had told them I had that book, and they're like, you need to read that book. And so I did. I went and I read that book because I'm like, how do we prove dispensationalism? So I read the book, I think it was by David Walker, called Dispensationalism, and hoping to prove dispensationalism. Well, the problem, I read that book and it's like, this is insanity. And I believe he's a Ruckmanite too. And I was just like, and then I came to the conclusion on my own that dispensationalism was garbage. But I literally had never been challenged on it by anyone. I had never heard a sermon preached against dispensationalism. Not long before that, I was at a church planting conference, and somebody was there selling Bibles, and I bought my very first Schofield. I knew nothing about Schofield. I just always heard people referencing their old Schofield. And so I was like, you know what? I ought to try out a Schofield. Thankfully, I started finding out the truth about Schofield shortly after getting this, and so I was never influenced by the notes. But again, I just hadn't been challenged on these things. And one of the reasons I'm doing the things I'm doing, the reason I demonize dispensationalism the way I do, I'm trying to challenge people on it because I'm convinced if people will take an honest look at dispensationalism, they're going to come to the conclusion that it's false. And that when it comes to legitimate things people are trying to reconcile, we don't need dispensationalism to do it. It's a very flawed method. But at the same time, I was a saved guy. I was a sincere guy. And I was good on most doctrine. And so it would have been ridiculous for somebody to not come to my church just because of that. Because even when I changed and I realized dispensationalism was wrong, how I operated my church, what I taught in my church did not really change much except for on end times. It would have been ridiculous for someone to not go to my old church all those years. That was one of the best churches I think that I have ever known, that made me who I am, that taught me the things that I still live by today, and the practices that I have today in my life and in my church are based off things I learned in that church that claim to be dispensational, even though I can't even think of a time I heard my dad use that word from the pulpit. He never said it. It was and again, I was 18 and I didn't even know what the word was. I didn't even know what it meant. When I saw I was going to take a class on dispensationalism, I had to ask, what is this? So that's where a lot of people are when it comes to dispensationalism. So while, on this program, we get into a lot of the details about Larkin and show the problems with Schofield and some of the really bad things that are in those books. Most dispensationalists don't believe those things. They've not gotten that deep into it, so we don't necessarily need to freak out. And so most dispensationalists, they only claim that label because they were told they were supposed to. We need to lovingly challenge these people. For many, it's just their way of explaining, well, we don't sacrifice animals anymore, so I'm a dispensationalist. In fact, I remember one time when I talked to Sam Gibb about dispensationalism, he's like, well, do you believe we ought to be sacrificing animals? I said, no. And he's like, then you're a dispensationalist. And that's dumb. Okay. But some people might have bought into that idea. Some people might fall for that. And if you fall for, and so if somebody does fall for that dumb line, it doesn't make them a heretic. It's just they got deceived into seeing that as not a dangerous term, even though I believe it is. And yes, I know the word dispensation is in the Bible 4 times, but I'm not going to get into this. Dispensationalists do not use that word dispensation the way the Apostle Paul uses it. You never see the word dispensations in the Bible, but yet you constantly hear dispensationalists refer to dispensations, even though and when they say that word, it shows they don't know what a dispensation is. Hey, preachers, if you ever say dispensations from the pulpit, understand, without even knowing the context of you using that verse, you just proved to me you don't know what the word means. So stop acting like what you're saying is biblical. Okay? There's no such thing as dispensations like you are describing. It's just not there, and that's another subject for another day. But so one of the things and listen, I'm not rebuking anybody that has called me, who has emailed me, who has left messages. I'm not rebuking anybody right now who has done that. These are honest questions. But you got to understand that 10 years ago, nobody in the Baptist world was like, at least in a vocal way. I'm sure there were some people I know there were some people out there in their churches speaking against this stuff. But those people were all shut out of the conferences. They weren't keynote speakers at any of the big conferences. They weren't putting out books exposing this stuff, and they definitely weren't on the internet 10 years ago. So just understand, we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of people just aren't even familiar with this idea. But a lot of people online, they'll freak out because they're looking for a church to go to, and then they'll go on the website, they'll look at the statement of faith that a lot of churches don't even pay close attention to what's on their statement of faith, and they'll see dispensations on there and they immediately freak out. That's not necessary. Okay, I'm going to talk about the heresies of dispensationalism and why it's so bad, but most dispensationalists don't believe that. In fact, I know some dispensationalists, they believe in, most believe in 7 dispensations, because dispensations are real big in numerology and they make 7 of everything. But many dispensationalists teach 3, and that is the law, the church, and the kingdom. I don't have a huge problem with that. I mean, obviously, the age before the church, the New Testament church, was very different. Things changed greatly at the coming of Jesus Christ. Okay? And then we do believe one of these days Jesus is going to return and set up a kingdom on this earth, and things will be very different then during that time. So if that's how somebody's breaking it down, I don't have a big problem with that. But yet those same people would call themselves dispensational, because every Baptist wants to call themselves a dispensationalist, because you're just supposed to. I've talked to people before who are more from the Reformed world. In fact, there was a young man, he was an assistant pastor in some kind of non-denom church, but yet they had accepted Reformed doctrine. Well, this young man, he had made a mistake, and he had read a lot of his Bible, and I'm being sarcastic when I say that. But he had also been told that they believed in the tulip. So the thing is, he knew what the tulip was. Okay, but at the same time, he had been reading his Bible, and it was very interesting, because when I was talking to him, and he starts describing a lot of what he believes about salvation, it wasn't lining up with the tulip. In fact, and so as I was listening to him, we started talking about the different aspects of the tulip, and he was explaining them to me. And this guy was perverting the tulip big time. And some people pervert the tulip so bad, they actually make it biblical. And I remember I told him, I was like, you don't need to use that tulip. Most people who claim the tulip do not interpret it the way you just did. But it was like what he was doing is he was trying to make the tulip fit the Bible. And in reality, he was teaching things about the tulip that most Calvinists would not believe in. But he was from a world that said he had just been told, we're reformed in our doctrine. We believe the tulip. But he had also read what the Bible says about grace. And so he was like that close on just about everything. He was still off a little bit, but at the same time, he was so close. And that's why I won't go as far as saying all tulip people are unsaved. I think a lot of them are saved. I think a lot of them have perverted the tulip into truth. And therefore, but it's just like, you don't need to claim the tulip. You don't need that label. And Baptists, you don't need to call yourself dispensationalists. And we need to warn people about that label. Otherwise, they might, when challenged on end times, what often happens is they go deeper into dispensationalism. Same thing with tulip people. If they have embraced that, if they have been convinced they're supposed to be tulip, when you challenge them on certain things, then they might go deeper into tulip doctrine and actually be a full-blown Calvinist. So it's very important how we approach these people that are legit, that are sincere, that are saved. We don't want to just fly off the handle, call them unsaved, and all that kind of nonsense. That will not be helpful. That is something that will probably do more damage than anything. And so the big deal doctrines that are bad when it comes to dispensationalism, the reason a lot of us freak out about so much, are things like multiple gospels. Okay, now most dispensationalists I know do not believe in multiple gospels. In fact, that was one of the big things that in our teaching, we were taught there's only one gospel. And we were also taught it's always been grace. My dad was constantly correcting it. Every time in the notes and in the books, it would be talking about the age of grace. My dad said it's always been grace. Most Baptists believe that. Most dispensationalists believe it's always been grace. And it's probably a minority of them that teach the different gospels. But Larkin did. Larkin actually had 4 different gospels. For some reason, the Ruckmanites only have 3, so they're a little closer, I guess. But Larkin actually showed 4 different gospels, and he wasn't talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in his book on dispensational truth. So that is a major heresy. That is really bad teaching. Now, there are some who have also been told by people they trust that there are multiple gospels, and what some of them have done is they have accepted the idea of multiple gospels, but the way they will explain it typically is just that, well, it was always by grace, it was always through faith, it was without works. However, it was spoken of in another way. For example, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ was not specifically and explicitly mentioned when, for example, when God preached the gospel to Abraham, saying, "In thee shall all nations of the earth be blessed." Obviously, God used different words explaining it, and when Abraham believed that, it was counted him for righteousness. But the message itself, in a way, was different, and in another way, it wasn't, because how did God bless all the nations through his seed? Well, through Jesus Christ, who would come, who would die for sins, would be buried, and would rise again. But you see how it was spoken of in another way. And so when somebody even explains it that way, I think we should lovingly rebuke them for calling it multiple gospels or 3 gospels or something like that, because that's so contrary to what Paul taught, who taught that there was not another gospel. And so, but at the same time, if that's what they mean they're still not heretics. That's just a very foolish way of saying it. Now, here's where I draw the line. When they say they were saved by faith plus works in the Old Testament, that right there shows me these people do not understand how salvation works at all in any dispensation. Okay, if they say when we go into in the tribulation, we're going back to the Old Testament economy and it's going to be faith plus works in the tribulation, that's where I draw the line. So those are the big deals. So don't even just go and say, well, do you believe in multiple gospels, and then immediately write them off. If they say they do believe in multiple gospels, ask them how they got saved in the Old Testament. If they say faith plus works, run. But if they give you some weird song and dance and just some weird thing trying to make that fit, give them the benefit of the doubt on that. They're probably not a heretic. But you have your hyper dispensationalists, which if you ask most dispensationalists, when you bring it up or you challenge them, they're like, well, I'm not a hyper dispensationalist. What do you mean by that? Well, I don't believe there's multiple gospels. I believe it's always been grace. Stuff like that. That's the kind of thing that they will typically bring up. So you have the hyper dispensationalists. You have the ultra dispensationalists. I hear that term referred to every once in a while. I'm not exactly sure what the accurate definition of that is, so I'm not going to say much about that. But you have also your mid-acts dispensationalists, and I've meant to do a program on mid-acts dispensationalism, but folks, that is a really goofy doctrine. In fact, I might say more about that in a little bit. But people who believe in mid-acts dispensationalism, they don't even believe in baptizing people in this dispensation. I would not go to that church. How is that even a Baptist church if they don't even believe in baptizing people? Okay, run from those people, and they are out there. And let me say this too. Okay, I have heard of those who are out there who they will baptize you if you ask them to, but at the same time too, they don't push it, they don't require it for membership or anything like that. And it's because they're kind of closet mid-acts dispensationalists. Listen, any church that is not encouraging people to be baptized by immersion, I wouldn't even recognize it as a Baptist church. I would run from that. And a lot of mid-acts dispensationalists believe that. I don't know if I want to take any time to go into that right now. I probably need to devote a whole episode to that one of these days because it's a very foolish doctrine. But so there are so there's also a lot of teachings that you and I would probably relate to dispensationalism that might not be completely fair. Okay, so for example, often people use dispensationalism as a way of propping up these weird doctrines, but you don't have to have dispensationalism to prop up these doctrines. In my experience, the ones who are into these things the most are heavily into dispensationalism, but at the same time, there are many people who are not dispensational and still believe these things. And so you got to watch out for that. But for example, the Abraham's bosom doctrine. Okay, I would not break fellowship with somebody over the Abraham's bosom doctrine, even though I completely disagree with it. I think what they teach on that is goofy. I think a lot of how they teach it, many are teaching it today, is based on a dispensational way of thinking. Because they'll say, well, before the cross, they weren't able to go to heaven. Therefore, they had to go to the holding tank in hell, in the good part of hell, Abraham's bosom. And that's foolish. But at the same time, that was being taught long before dispensationalism came along. That is, and I've done whole programs on that. I'm not going to get into the origins of that, but you cannot necessarily attribute that doctrine to dispensationalism, even though many people use dispensationalism to prop up that doctrine. But I still wouldn't break fellowship with somebody over that. Another one, and I won't break fellowship with somebody over this, even though I get aggravated by this teaching. This also is one that you can have this doctrine without being a dispensationalist, but at the same time, the more hardcore people are on this doctrine, typically the more hardcore they are on dispensationalism, and that's the Nephilim doctrine. Okay? Because it's like the Nephilim doctrine just goes against reality in so many ways. But in the mind of most dispensationalists, it's like you're able to change the rules of reality, and if you're in another dispensation. And so it's like it makes it easier for them to believe that doctrine. But that alone, you can believe that without being a dispensationalist. And many people on our side are very aggravated by that teaching. I am aggravated by that teaching, but I would not break fellowship with anybody over that. I would go to a church where they believe that. And on the occasional time when it would come up and they would talk about that, I would work very hard to not make cringing faces, even though I would be tempted to do that. In fact, I was a preacher who I love and respect a lot. I was at a meeting years ago, and he was preaching, and he got up and he started talking about, he was telling the story of David and Goliath, and he referred to Goliath as a Nephilim, and started he started talking like Goliath was like just this deformed, hybrid creature. And it was really weird. And I'm just like, what in the world? Where did that come from? Rest of the message was great, but when he said that stuff about Goliath and being a Nephilim, I was like, okay, that's ridiculous. But still a good preacher, still a great guy. That kind of stuff's aggravating. But gap theory is another thing that write in the notes your Schofield. One of the first things you'll see, you read Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Notes, earth made waste and empty by judgment. And then it uses Jeremiah 4:23-26. And that does not help its cause using that passage. That absolutely does not help its cause, but it does. And then the earth is out form and void. So it just sorts a gap right there. Right in Schofield's notes, and it's got more about that in the bottom section on the notes. Aggravating doctrine. But here's the thing. Abraham's bosom, Nephilim, gap theory. Did you know none of these teachings affect your daily walk with God or how to be a Christian? It's not related. Yet at the same time, and I'm going to show this, again, I'm trying not to rebuke people, but I am going to rebuke this guy a little bit because this gets aggravating, and maybe this was insincerity and all that, but and maybe I'm just I've heard this foolishness too many times, and so I'm taking it out on the wrong guy. But look at what he said here. He said, this was from the podcast that was just released last night with me and Brother Matt First on Rediscover podcast. Make sure you check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But Frankenberry, I don't care what First says. I refuse, all caps there, to go to a pre-trib church. If a pastor can't even get a doctrine so clearly laid out in 2 Thessalonians, how on earth am I supposed to trust them on deeper doctrines? That to me is the cop-out. I will not compromise doctrine in order to go along to get along. So, and that's the line everybody does. I will not compromise. I'm not compromising on my eschatology. I'm not compromising about Israel. Yeah, another doctrine that does not affect your day-to-day life does not affect your behavior. But you will compromise on the doctrine on going to church. That absolutely does affect your life. That is something we are commanded to do. You are specifically commanded to go to church, to not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. You've been commanded to do that kind of thing. You've been commanded to provoke unto love and good works. And we do that by not forsaking the assembling. You're not provoking to love and good works by posting about reprobates all day long on YouTube or on Facebook. That's not. So the thing is, you compromise on so many other doctrines. You know how many people won't compromise on eschatology, yet they'll compromise on being a good Christian, being a good employee, being a good husband, being a good father, things that become sound doctrine on how we teach or how we're supposed to treat older men, how we're supposed to treat other men our age, how we should treat the elderly ladies in the church and the young ladies in the church. All these commands that we have throughout Paul's epistles about behavior within the house of God. Things so we will know how to behave ourselves in the house of God. You're going to compromise on all of that teaching that affects your everyday life, but you're not going to compromise when it comes to the gap theory. Anybody who believes in Nephilim, I think they're a false prophet. I'm not going near their church. No, you are a massive compromiser, and you're a huge hypocrite. You are omitting the weightier matters, is exactly what you're doing. You're making such a big deal, and that is internet people. They make the biggest deal about doctrines that do not affect your day-to-day life while ignoring the much bigger things. And I find that repulsive. You cannot do that. It is more important that you go to church than just about anything in your life. And the churches that made me who I am were pre-trib, pro-Israel churches. And so when you, if you see that a church has these things, you need to give them the benefit of the doubt. You need to give them an opportunity. You absolutely should go to these churches. Some of these teachings are aggravating. Even teaching like the Gentiles being plan B. Okay, even with that foolish teaching. Again, I'm going to keep saying this. In fact, I'm preaching a message about it Sunday. Many people's doctrine, it's more politically based or motivated than scripturally motivated. I'm going to keep harping on that because people need to recognize if their convictions are political or scriptural convictions. If your convictions are only political, you can change those if you need to. If it's scriptural, you shouldn't change those things. But this Gentiles being plan B, that is another foolish doctrine. But you got to understand what some people are saying. Okay? And it's because they've been told you're supposed to believe this because you're dispensational. Understand that God originally gave things to the Jews. There was a plan under the law, and because of the fact that the Jews failed in the execution of that plan, we see that the kingdom was given to the Gentiles. Okay? Now, somebody calling that a plan B, that's not accurate, and that's not a good way to explain it. But we do need to acknowledge the kingdom was taken from them and given to another nation. Now, the reason it's foolish to call it plan B is because we can go back in the Old Testament, we can see what was revealed in the New Testament, and we find out that was actually plan A. Okay, it was, the law was a schoolmaster to bring people to salvation. The law was given in a way to show Israel their sin and to help them recognize the Messiah when he came. So the thing is, though, when people are looking at certain things in the law and they rightfully see the end game that's described in there, and then they see something different in the New Testament, you can kind of see where somebody might get that idea. But they're explaining it in a terrible way, and they're making some mistakes with that. And so we just need to be, some people just need to be taught better on it. And there's all kinds of different levels people go to on that. So I wouldn't even break fellowship over something like that. These are just things that really annoy us who have recognized the truth of all these things. There's a difference between something that's like a damnable heresy and just something that annoys the fire out of us. And a lot of these things annoy the fire out of us. Okay. So yeah, but it's wrong. Well, you know what? Some people, they mispronounce words in the Bible and they're wrong in how they're pronouncing it. And it's annoying hearing them do that. But does that make them a heretic, even though they're wrong? No, it's just annoying. Have some patience and just recognize too that, a lot of these dispensational preachers have a lot to offer and have a lot you can learn from. Because again, who cares what you know about end times if you don't know anything about godly living? Who cares what you know about end times if you don't know how to be a good husband? If you're just not a good Christian? So, many people are missing out on some wonderful blessings by not going to these dispensational churches. And you have got to have the ability and the self-control and the humility to realize you are not superior to these people just because you got a couple things right that they don't. Chances are they've got a lot more right that you don't in areas that are more important. And so you got to give these people a chance. And so I would give all dispensationalists the benefit of the doubt because, again, many have never been challenged on it. And so just assume the best with these people. Absolutely. Assume the best. And so I want to take some time to answer any questions if you have them. I'm going to try to read the chat as we go through it. It's good to see Benjamin Benet in there. I'll take a church that teaches dispensationalism over a church that teaches NIFBism. Me too. And not even be, and when we say new IFBisms, I'm assuming you're meaning the crazy stuff, not necessarily a lot of stuff that are right. There's a lot of things that new IFB has right that old IFB has wrong. But then there's a lot of stuff they have wrong and old IFB has right. And again, weightier matters. Eschatology, that's pretty low on my list. I just enjoy talking about that. But see, Daniel, short answer, yes. Yeah, short answer, should you go to dispensational church? Yes. For sure. I said I would give them the benefit of the doubt. And here's another thing too. So a lot of these, and I've had pastors tell me this. If you ask them about dispensationalism, they will say, yes, I am, but they almost never talk about it, ever. Typically what happens is when you challenge them, then they resort to it. And that's why you need to be careful how you challenge these people too. Again, if you go to a church that's a good church and the pastor's never talking about all this stuff, I wouldn't even bring it up, because chances are you're going to freak him out and drive him to his dispensational books. Because one of the mistakes everyone makes when studying a doctrine is they often go to the scriptures with a preconceived idea that their doctrine is correct, and they go looking for proof of what they've already decided is true. And that's going to mess you up every single time. You need to learn how to go to the scriptures and let the Bible tell you what is true. And you're going to find out what's going to happen is sometimes you're going to find out, okay, this isn't as clear as I thought it was. And then you know what's going to happen? You're going to be a lot more gracious. And let me say this. In the 10 years now that I have been teaching on this subject, I have seen massive changes in Baptists and how accepting they are of people who disagree with them on this. I've seen many people who, while they haven't come fully to my position on things, they have fixed a lot of errors. And I'm telling you, I do believe there is a slow but sure drift in the right direction on this stuff. And so keep giving people time. More and more people are coming out and like, yeah, this is foolish, especially on the Zionism. A lot of people are figuring out Zionism is a bunch of baloney. Now, the older generation that taught this their whole life, they're never going to change, but a lot of those people are dying out too. And the next generation is not going to keep that foolishness going. Not in the Baptist world. I don't believe. Too many people are figuring it out. And so just give it time. But yeah, so read some more of these. What if they are overly zealous, borderline worshiping admiration of Jews? Okay, first off, nobody actually worships them. That's an insult we throw at them because that's what it feels like sometimes. And that is super annoying. Okay, folks, it is annoying. Hey, pre-trib preachers out there, okay, you can disagree with me on my eschatology, but you shouldn't be able to disagree with what I'm about to say now. If you are going to preach through the book of Revelation and it turns into all the latest stories in the news about Israel, you're not preaching Revelation. And you are annoying the fire out of all of the rest of us. And that is so common. If I listen to any preacher preach through Revelation, it always turns into a Zionist infomercial talking about the latest headlines about Israel and Gaza and all that kind of stuff. Man, that is so messed up. That is so annoying. But you know what? Hey, those of you who believe we're going to go through the tribulation like I do, remember what it talks about the patience of the saints? Maybe you need to learn to sit through that to develop some of that patience that'll help you in the tribulation. So if you can't endure listening to a preacher get up and do a 45-minute Zionist infomercial talking about the latest headlines in Israel, you're not going to be able to survive the tribulation either. So just put up with it. All right? Just put up with it. But it's annoying. It is super annoying. But that's why the Bible constantly talks about forbearing one another, forgiving one another. Yeah, so it's just annoying. We don't leave church and get out of church because people are annoying. I've gone to church with a lot of annoying people before, but Mark Boyer, is this a message for me? LOL. I go to a church that supports Israel because it's where my wife likes to go, but I listen to a great preacher on YouTube. And he likes my preaching. Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, they support Israel. If they pass a plate trying to raise money for bulletproof vests and tactical gear, I would let the plate go right by me that day. I wouldn't give any money to that, but I could put up with it. I go to a church that is basically pan-millennial. We have 3 pastors and about 12 elders. There's a difference of opinion on eschatology there. I like that there is a diversity of opinions on it. It works for me, being of a minority eschatological view. And yeah, I do think, like I said, the more I learn, the less dogmatic I am on eschatology. I'm more dogmatic that dispensationalism and pre-trib is complete foolishness. But at the same time, yeah. And folks, just hopefully real soon. In fact, I need to call him today. I'm hoping to have a pastor on here who has a different view of eschatology than I do. But man, it's getting really close. And this is a good guy that I have a ton of respect for. Anybody who holds this position, I have no problems with people like this. And there's a couple things where it's like, maybe he's right. A couple areas where I hope he's right. I don't think he is, but we're going to talk about that other position on there. Okay? And those of you echo chamber people, you're going to get triggered by it because you're going to hear something different than what you're used to hearing, and you're going to get super frustrated when you hear that, and you're going to get real mad at me, and you're going to lash out. And you know why you're doing that? Because you're going to become very insecure because of the fact that you are not going to be able to disprove what he's saying, because there's some speculation on his side. But what you're going to realize when he points these things out is that there's speculation on our side too. And that's why you got to learn the difference between that which is based on clear scripture and that which is speculation. And in the pre-trib world, they have never even thought about those concepts. What's based on clear teaching and what's based on speculation. Most of theirs is speculation. But you know what? We're starting to have the same problem in the post-trib world. We've speculated on a lot of things, and we've agreed on each other's speculation, and it's just become considered sound doctrine. But it's like, well, wait a minute. And then somebody comes along, and then they challenge us on that, and we act like they're a heretic or something like that. It's like, no. When it comes to this aspect of what we believe, that's speculation. So maybe these people are right on that. But I know those thoughts freak y'all out. But again, this is why this is a podcast everyone's talking about. We don't have all the answers, but we're not afraid to find out what they are. But the Truth Hunter, I'm just now tuning and behold and behind. I've been a member of both the Ruckmanite dispensational church that taught salvation, and I would never that taught salvation. I never would go there. They don't understand salvation. Yeah, I would definitely stay away from Ruckmanites for sure. I've also been a member of a dispensational church that rejected Ruckman and dispensational salvation, had other issues because of that, but it was a great church. And so, yeah, Peter Ruckman and Clarence Larkin taught many crazy heresy that Christ would cease to exist. But your average normal dispensationalist has no clue about that and would reject that if you mention it. So Chris Lucas, hey everyone, my experience with Baptist churches, except Seventh-day Baptists, were ran with an iron fist. You start asking questions and they become hostile, like Jason Cooley. The first time I heard Tulip, I tried to make it fit the Bible. Then under more discussion, I left the church. It seemed confusing, though I still didn't understand Tulip until years later. So I don't know if he is a Tulip guy now, and that's too bad. But if that's the case, I'm not real sure. But hello to Brother Matt, and then Nancy Petrick. I shared a 17-minute clip from Pastor Chuck Baldwin with my sister a year ago. She hasn't talked to me since. People do not want to hear anything that challenges their belief system. Yeah, and that's just it. People, they freak out when it's not pleasant finding out you've been wrong about something. Because we've had it beaten in our heads as IFB people, don't change. But at the same time, What if we're wrong about something? Trust us, we're right, we're right, we're right. You know, Lester Roloff, Jack Hyles, Oliver B. Green. You know, and they start name dropping. Yeah, but can you give me some scriptural proof on this? And a lot of times they can't do it. And so, yeah. So when you do, if you show some of Chuck, I'm telling you, some of Chuck Baldwin's sermons, yeah, it's going to mess with your reality because he can lay it out as good as anybody. Just some of the foolishness of dispensationalism, truths about Israel. He's got some really good teaching out there on that. So good to have Ellison in the live chat. We got Psalm 19. Paul cut ties with Hymenaeus and Alexander over eschatology. It matters. And I love that you brought that up because people bring that up too whenever they want to be divisive. Can you tell me specifically what about their eschatology? So just because it's in the category of eschatology does not now mean that any eschatological category is worth breaking fellowship over. What was their heresy? That the resurrection was past. Okay, pre-tribbers do not believe the resurrection is past. Amillennialists, most of them, do not believe the resurrection is past. Postmillennialists do not believe the resurrection is past. So, of course, the teaching about the resurrection absolutely matters. If there is no resurrection of the dead, then is Christ not risen? That absolutely matters. Every futurist I know believes in a resurrection. So you can't use Hymenaeus and Philetus as an excuse to cut ties with other futurists. That is wrong. And you want to know who else uses arguments like that? Pre-tribbers to go after us. That's ridiculous. Because because sometimes people on our side will say certain prophecies have already been fulfilled. They're just like Hymenaeus and Philetus. Well, wait a minute. There's a huge difference between thinking that the abomination of desolation already happened and the resurrection. That is a much bigger doctrine than what you believe about the abomination of desolation. So I won't break fellowship with somebody who believes the abomination of desolation is past. That's not related to the Hymenaeus and Philetus heresy. So if you're blessed enough to have a church, it's from Sean Wallace, that preaches the right gospel, uses the KJV, and sings the old hymns, you better thank God for it. Amen. I agree. And yeah, the truth under saying the resurrection is past already is a major heresy to separate over, obviously, but that's not a prescription cut fellowship over timing of the rapture or something. So Truth Hunter had already called that out. Very good point. Charles Wynn, my pastor, doesn't like dispensationalism, but he absolutely teaches it. Well, yet this is another important thing too. Many people say that they reject Scofield because they've learned he's bad, but yet they teach Scofieldism all the time because Scofield's notes have influenced a lot of people and a lot of books and a lot of teaching. For example, I've had many people tell me I reject Scofieldism, but then when you go to 2 Thessalonians 2, they believe that the restrainer, and they'll use the word restrainer, is the Holy Spirit. Even though that's not the word the King James uses, but it is a word that Scofield uses, and Scofield claims it's the Holy Spirit. So that is a very common thing. Sometimes we succeed in demonizing a title, an ism, but at the same time, many people have they've not been educated on all the teaching associated with that ism. And so a lot of times, even though they've not read Larkin's Dispensational Truth, they've read other people's books, they've listened to other people's teachings that were influenced by those things. So that is very common for that kind of thing to happen. And you know what? It happens to all of us. It absolutely happens to all of us. And that's why for myself, I'm constantly, whenever I'm challenged on something, I like to go back and figure out what is the actual basis for what I believe. And a lot of times you'll find out it's not rooted in clear scripture. It's speculation based on difficult scripture. So Pastor Huckleberry on here. Let's see. Yeah, Psalm 91, you can thank Scofield for popularizing the gap theory nonsense. I agree. Benjamin Benag. Do you think it's possible for a later generation, hyperdispy, Ruckmanite, etc., who has been taught multiple gospel heresies since birth might be saved, though sincerely deceived. I definitely think so, because here's what we got to understand. The gospel is very simple. It's easy to get saved. Things like dispensationalism, that's not taught until later. Same thing, too, with even Calvinism. Okay? Nobody gets saved from learning about Calvinism. They get saved from hearing the gospel, but then later people get sucked into bad teaching that can kind of make them unfruitful and make them ineffective in their ministries. And so I think it's possible for a saved person to get caught up in that stuff. But at the same time, too, watch my next podcast on Hebrews that I'm going to be doing. I do have expectation that somebody who is truly saved, that they will come around to certain truths. Now, I don't know the timing of that. That does not mean they're just going to automatically agree with everything I'm telling them on my second admonition that I give them. Now, it might take a lot of time, and so you got to have a lot of patience with that. But I do think saved people can get confused with that stuff because, again, Baptists, we are very man-centered. We're very political. We are there's constant name dropping of the great men in Baptist churches and Baptist circles, and especially in any kind of Baptist conference. It's nonstop name drop, name drop, name drop, name drop. We have been trained, we have been programmed to just blindly follow men more than to follow the scriptures. And so because of that, good people who are just practicing what they have been taught for a very long time, they're going to get caught up in goofy stuff. So I got Mitch Levengood. My church teaches multiple dispensations in the book of Acts alone. Different salvations. Man, that stinks. And I got to cover mid-Acts dispensationalism one of these days, because I think that is super easy to disprove. And I've listened to other dispensationalists disprove it, and that is painful to listen to. If you want to compare something to the painfulness of listening to a Calvinist and a dispensationalist debate over Romans 9, where both of them are like equally wrong, go listen to a dispensationalist debating a mid-Acts dispensationalist, where they are both dead wrong. Because when I'm listening to the Romans 9 debate, I want the dispensationalists to win because I like them better than Calvinists, but I think they almost butcher the scripture worse than the Calvinist does. And then if I'm listening to a dispensationalist versus a mid-Acts dispensationalist, I want to be on the dispensationalist side, but he butchers the scriptures so bad, it's painful. And so I would like, and many dispensationalists have things out there debunking mid-Acts dispensationalism, but often they are debunking major error with lesser error. I think it's better to debunk error with truth. And so everybody needs to remind me to get to the mid-Acts dispensationalism stuff sometime. So let's see. Lost my spot. My church's dispensationalism. I don't hear a lot about it in the preaching. Maybe every once in a while. Also, the gap theory and the Nephilim doctrine is considered false and weird. Yeah, so you probably got a normal dispensationalist pastor, so that's good. Chris Lucas, no one hardly seemed to teach Daniel's 70th week was future, and no one seemed to teach full preterism either until the Jesuits started pushing those two ideas in the late 1500s to counter Protestantism. And I think there's probably a lot of truth to what he just said right there. Bradley, you can't have dispensationalism without a gap theory in the 70 weeks of prophecy. Well, again, it depends on how you define Daniel's 70th week. Again, I'm fine either way. I don't have a problem with the gap. It just depends on how you explain the gap. Because, and then two, I think both can be true, to where the 490-year prophecy was one continual 490 years. But I think it's very clear in the scriptures that when Jesus came to Jerusalem on that Palm Sunday at his triumphal entry, Israel was not ready on that day of visitation. They were not prepared. So the big question is, how will the 70th week be fulfilled, or at least or maybe the last half of the 70th week be fulfilled? I believe there is still a fulfillment that needs to take place because certain things did not happen within the 490-year period because of Israel's failure. And so we've got to understand, again, and I've said this a million times, prophecy is not just looking at a crystal ball and saying this is exactly how this is going to happen. No, this is showing sometimes some prophecies are like, this is what will happen if you do X, Y, and Z. This is what will happen if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And so whenever we look at prophecies like that, we have to check, well, what did they do? And if they didn't do what they were supposed to do, then we might need to expect a different outcome. And that's how many prophecies work. Some prophecies are just that, saying this is what's going to happen, nothing can change it, this is settled, this is done. But not all prophecies are like that, and you got to learn to distinguish between those two things. So I'm going to shut this down here pretty soon. I'm going to kind of scroll through these, make sure I've got all the questions. But Darby and Jason Jack. Darby and Schofield were key figures in this deception taking hold within the church. Yeah, I agree. Those guys did a lot of damage, and I believe we're having a very slow recovery on that, but it needs to speed up. We need to pray for more preachers to come out strong against this. I would love to see some of these big name Bible college preachers, some big name, come out against this nonsense. But unfortunately, all these big names, they are so, like, especially if they have a Bible college, they can't afford to offend a whole bunch of the churches that support their Bible college. And sadly, because they have these big Bible colleges, people look to them for leadership. And it really is a shame because these people aren't even leading. They, a lot of times, are just kind of going with the flow to hang on to their little kingdom that they've built. And I would really love to see one of these people just take a bold stand and even be willing to sacrifice everything and say, hey, I'm done with this nonsense. We've got to get this stuff right. It's ridiculous. But I think that's all the questions that we had in there. But I do appreciate everybody coming on here. My globe is it's plugged in, so it's just electric. If I unplug it, the globe gets sucked right back down. Kind of weird how all that works. But yeah, so I think we're all caught up on the questions. But I appreciate everybody watching this. And so those of you out there looking for churches, please, 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 please give these dispensational churches the benefit of the doubt. You could be missing out on a huge blessing by not being in these churches. I would say probably 9 times out of 10, you are better off going to these churches than not going to them. And let me just say this too. Me saying this is going to get a lot of people really fired up and upset and act like I'm some kind of compromising heretic. Here's why that is. Because their position is political, not scriptural. When your position is politically motivated, typically you just take the most hardcore position you can, supporting whatever leading voice that you have decided to get behind. But those whose position is scripturally based, they understand where the legitimate problems are at and where they are not at, and they're able to distinguish the difference between the bad guy and the bad guys and the good guys. They can tell, and most of them are good guys. If they're independent fundamental Baptists with the King James Bible, chances are they're going to be dispensational, but chances are they're good, saved guys that you've got a lot that you can learn from. You might be able to teach them a couple of facts about the tribulation, all that kind of stuff, but I'll bet they can teach you a whole bunch of stuff about living life, about marriage, about parenting, things like that. And so hopefully you will get in those churches. Ronnie on here said that I don't think our church is dispensational. Maybe that isn't common in our area. And again, I would guess most are, but they never mention it. And imagine not going to a church because it says dispensational on their statement of faith, but they're one of these that never mention it. You would have, I can't even think of a time I ever heard the word mentioned at the pulpit in my previous church. I'm sure it was said, but I don't remember. It was not talked about much. And so, yeah, don't get freaked out by these things. There's some great churches out there, and y'all need to get in them, be a part of them, and grow and become a good Christian, and it'll make a big difference in your life. So I do appreciate everybody watching these. Make sure you like and subscribe and share. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and watch my series on Hebrews. I know there's nothing controversial in there. I'm not calling anybody out. There's no drama in there. It's just good teaching from the scriptures. But the truths taught in Hebrews are the things that are going to help you answer all the difficult questions that dispensationalists are trying to answer. Good, honest dispensationalists are trying with their Bibles to answer good, honest questions. Unfortunately, they're using dispensationalism, where if they had a proper understanding of the book of Hebrews, they would be able to answer every one of those things without dispensationalism. They would know how to explain all the phenomenon that we see in the book of Acts that people will refer to as other dispensations. If they have a proper understanding of Hebrews and how that works, they're going to be able to explain all that stuff in a way that makes so much more sense. They won't have to get any of the nonsense. So make sure you check those out. I think they're going to be a powerful tool. I'm going to try to release Hebrews 6 before the week is over, and I think it will be a big help to you. That has a passage in there that a lot of people use to teach you can lose your salvation, when it's actually teaching opposite. And so I'm looking forward to covering that. So thank you all so much for watching this. The viewers were constantly going up as we went. We're like at its highest point now, and I'm shutting it down now, but it is time for me to go. Thank you all for watching this. God bless.